I wonder if you've ever heard these words, maybe especially when you were young. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. How many of you have heard that? How many of you believe it? No. I don't know who came up with that, but they are so wrong that it's unbelievable. Now, words may not break our bones, but they hurt, don't they? In fact, I'm going to guess that there are some of you sitting here now that even as I'm talking about this, you are thinking of words that were spoken to you perhaps when you were a child, perhaps when you were a teen. I was thinking of that when Harrison was talking about his nicknames. My nicknames at school were not quite as positive as his. And maybe it was something that was said to you on the way to church this morning. Maybe it was something that was said to you this week. But words have a tremendous, tremendous power. In fact, Proverbs goes so far as to say this in Proverbs 18:21, death and life are in the power of the tongue. Death and life are in the power of the tongue. Man, that's almost hard to believe that the words that I can say can bring life or death to another person. And this verse alone screams out to us that our words do matter. Our words do mean something. Our words do impact people around us. And they often reach far beyond what we ever intended, what we ever meant, what we really wanted to say, and it has come out wrong. Proverbs 12:18 compares our words, listen to this, compares our words to a sword. That's how dangerous they can be sometimes. In Proverbs 12:18 says, there is one whose rash words are like sword thrusts. Every time we open our mouth, we must realize this. Every time we open our mouth, we are yielding a sword that has the potential for great damage in someone's life. Our words can do irreversible, and I do mean irreversible damage. If we stab someone with a sword, we can pull it out. But that person still has a scar. And even if they survive, they will still have that scar. And that's what I think some of these words that perhaps you were thinking about earlier, some of these words that impact us are. They're like a scar in our life. I was talking to somebody this week, a pastor here in town, and his face is very scarred from some cancer surgery that he had. He wears a mask now. But he said, you know what's amazing to me? And his ministry is primarily with indigenous people. And he said, what is amazing to me, even though he's been in this ministry for as long as I've known him, 30 years or more, he said, it's amazing how these scars have opened the door for ministry, deeper ministry to indigenous people, because he said they're all scarred. Not necessarily on their face or anywhere else, physically, but they're scarred. And he says, now when I talk to them, I can talk about my scars, even though they're physical. And so they have this potential to scar people for life. Even in the New Testament, James says in James 3, 4, and 5, look at the ships also. Though they are so large and are driven by strong winds, they are guided by a very small rudder that guides them wherever the pilot wants to take them. So also the tongue is a small member, yet boasts of many things, of great things. Now this week I discovered something that I didn't know before. There are 915 verses in the book of Proverbs. 222 of them, just under a quarter, have to do with our words and our tongue and our speech. Just under 25% of what is in the book of Proverbs has to deal with the words that we say and the way that we speak. God has given us this enormous amount of instruction for a reason. But how do we use the gift of speech wisely? And it's important that we learn to do it wisely because life and death are in the power of the tongue. And when we learn to walk in wisdom, and remember that really the whole book of Proverbs is about wisdom and learning to walk in wisdom and learning to walk in the wisdom that God instructs us in. And as we learn to walk in wisdom, we learn to speak carefully. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, this has not been a real strength of mine. But we learn to speak carefully the more we grow in wisdom. And one of the ways, and this is one of my issues, one of the ways that we learn to speak words carefully is to not speak so much. To sometimes just be quiet. Sometimes just sit back. The average person speaks 16,000 words a day. 16,000 words a day the average person speaks. Now, with 16,000 words a day, there's a whole lot of opportunity to say something wrong, to say something in the wrong way, to say something to someone that we shouldn't say. Maybe it's the right thing, but it's to the wrong person. Proverbs 10:19 says, when words are many, transgression is not lacking. But whoever restrains his lip is prudent. Probably most of us in this room know what it's like to look back a few days before, a few weeks before, or maybe even just a few seconds before, and think, why did I say that? What made me think that that was a good thing to say at that time? What made me think that that was appropriate? I shouldn't have said that. Why did I say that? And I have this guide in my life. Her name is Wendy. And there have been so many times in our marriage when we are driving home, and I don't have to ask those questions because Wendy asks them for me. And we're driving home somewhere and she's saying, Dan, why did you say that? That was hurtful. And what did I say? And then she tells me and I realize, oh man, what was I thinking? Why did I say that? Because when she tells me either the words that I said or the context in which I said them, I realize that was stupid. That was unthoughtful. That was unwise. If we open our mouths too often, we're almost bound to stick our foot in it. We're almost bound. Some of us could be learn to use a little less of speech. And all of us would be blessed if we learned to speak less and listen more. Speak less and listen more. And this was a lesson that I've had to learn. Proverbs 17:28 says, even a fool who keeps silent is considered wise. When he closes his lips, he is deemed intelligent. Maybe you've heard the saying, it's better to be quiet and be thought a fool than to open your mouth and erase all doubt. And sometimes we just need to not say anything. Just to learn to listen. Consider our words carefully. And when we do that, people are apt to listen to us more than they would before. I remember being in a congregational meeting one time, and the chairs, were set up in kind of a rectangle with nobody on the insides of the tables. And I was saying something, and the people on the opposite side of the tables of the room were like, most of them were leaning like this, or they were leaning on the tables or something like that. And this is where it began to get to me. As I'm looking out and I'm looking at them and I'm speaking forcefully about something I believe strongly in, here's what I began to notice. People who had been kind of leaning forward physically started to go like this. They were literally, without knowing it, trying to get away from me. And when I went home later, I thought about what I had said. I don't remember what it was now. And I realized that I was right. But the way I said it ensured that people would not listen to me. And so sometimes, even when we're right, we can be wrong because of how we say what we say. And one of the reasons that I think we need to, one of the reasons I think we need to learn to speak less is to avoid speaking impulsively. Proverbs 18:13 says, if one gives an answer before he hears, it is his folly and shame. Speaking before the person has finished may be to our shame. If we don't take the time to listen, we're telling people you don't matter to me. I remember being in a counseling session one time, and I was counseling this couple, and the husband went to speak. Well, I knew exactly where he was going with it. So I thought, I'll finish it for him. And I blurted in, and I said, and I finished the sentence, and he said, that's not what I was going to say. So even as a counselor, what I said to him was, you are not worth listening to. I know more than you. I can finish your sentence for you. I'm so intelligent. And by failing to listen, we're telling people they don't count. Proverbs 18:21 really gets to the root of the problem. It says, a fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing his opinion. And again, I know none of you here struggle with this. Although I think I've grown a great deal over the last number of years, I still have a struggle with thinking everybody wants to hear my opinion. And if I gave them my opinion, it would solve all their problems. And so we need to listen. We need to be ready to listen to people and not just, wait for them to shut up so that we can share our opinion with them. The author is saying that a fool is someone who's interested only in their own thoughts, their own opinions, their own ideas. They like to hear himself or herself talk. I read in Reader's Digest one time, and I don't know about you, but I'm at the stage in my life where it's not in the Bible or Reader's Digest, it's just not true. And this little girl, a grade 4 girl, and they were asked in her class, what is listening? And she said this, so profound, out of the mouths of babes. She said, listening is wanting to hear. Beloved, that's amazing. Because sometimes when we are listening, we're not wanting to hear, we're wanting them to shut up so we can talk. Or we're already planning our response to them. And so we just don't listen to them. We don't listen to what other people have to say. We're just waiting to give our 2 cents. A fool doesn't take time to digest and to understand what the other person is saying. They only try to get them to see things their way because their way is the right way. And so they don't listen like they could. One of the helpful things that I've learned, and again, as I've said, that I've learned the hard way, is to make sure that I'm understanding the other person. I have this nasty habit when Wendy's, and maybe this is a man thing, I don't know. Wendy's sharing something, and I want to jump in and give her the answer right away. And over the years, Wendy's gotten very good at saying, no, don't talk. Just listen to me. Hear me out first. And she'll tell me that. No, stop talking. I just need you to listen to me. And sometimes we need somebody like that in our lives to just say, no, just listen to me. Don't try and solve all my problems. And sometimes we just say, okay, if I'm understanding correctly, this is what you're saying. And we repeat back to them, and they can say, yeah, you're dead on, or no, you missed it a bit. This is what it is. And so we learn to do that. And so we have to understand that life and death are in the power of the tongue. And so we choose our words carefully, and we learn to listen and not be so quick to speak. But also, as we're walking in wisdom, we learn to speak truthfully. We learn to speak truthfully. In Proverbs 12:22 says, lying lips are an abomination to the Lord. When I was a young person, a child, my parents had this thing called little white lies. You ever hear that? Little white lies. What it meant was, and I don't to this day completely understand what it was, but what I did learn was this: those are lies that are okay. It's not a little black lie or a big black lie. It's a little white lie. And so it's okay. And I think that so often we avoid truthfulness to get out of tough situations or tough conversations. We're into something, we don't know quite how to deal with it. So we begin to be untrue. Maybe not even deliberate lying. And maybe not even lying as some people might see it, but we just begin to twist things a little bit to get ourselves out of this fix that we have found ourselves in. And it's so important for us, beloved, as a church, as individuals and the church as a whole, is to not speak untruth. Because sincere, honest words are what build love and grace and truth and trust and intimacy. That's what makes it possible for us as a church. What do false words do? False words put on masks. How are you doing? Fine. You're not doing fine at all. I remember listening to someone one time when they were teaching a course on helping people work through things, a Sunday morning course before church. And so what he said to them was this morning, as you leave this class and go to the service, you're going to be asked many times, how are you? Here's how I want you to respond. I'm dying of cancer. And so they all walked out. There was about 12 people in the class, and they all walked out. How are you doing? I'm dying of cancer. Not one person stopped. They all said, oh, great, and kept going. So we often don't listen, and we don't speak words of grace to people. We speak untruth because we're not really listening. Instead, we create these masks. We put on these masks. We create a facade. We're comfortable with a false intimacy rather than a real intimacy. We cultivate hypocrisy. Proverbs 12:19 says, truthful lips endure forever, but a lying tongue is but for a moment. The truth endures. But here's the problem. You lie, and then you have to cover up with another lie, and then you have to cover up with another lie, and another lie, until there comes a time in your life where you're not even really sure what's true anymore. And we have to understand that. And we also use our tongues for gossip. You know what? I hate to say it, but many people love gossip. They love to hear negative things about people. I hate gossip. I've seen how it can divide a church. Then help me to understand why I take part in it so often. I hate it. And yet I'll find myself doing it, taking part in it. Oh, there's times when I realize what's going on and I'll say, no, I don't want to talk about this. I don't want to talk about that person. But more often, though, I want to admit I take part in the very thing that I don't like, that I even hate. There's this sinful part of me that I know resides in nobody else here. But the sinful part of me that actually delights to sometimes hear those things about people. And I take part in it. Proverbs 18:8 says, the words of a whisperer are like delicious morsels. Isn't that true? Sometimes you hear something about people and it's like a delicious morsel. Oh, I always figured there was something there. And so we take part in the gossip. When we take part in gossip, we have to understand that it is such a divisive thing. Again, I've seen a church basically split, not because of something that was real, but false gossip. And it started and it just went like a rapid fire. And the church split, and it wasn't even true. A dishonest man, Proverbs 16 says, a dishonest man spreads strife, and a whisperer separates close friends. When we talk behind people's back, when we are gossipy, we are risking the destruction of not just that relationship with that person, but perhaps the relationship that that person has with others. Proverbs 11:9 says, with his mouth the godless man would destroy his neighbor. Gossip destroys. And even if it's true, ask yourself, does it really need to be repeated? There's this comedian, I can't remember her name, a gal, and she's a Christian. And so she does this thing about how do Christians deal with gossip? Well, they don't gossip. They say, we need to pray for so-and-so. And she does this thing about a youth group and the youth leader calling people over, let's go, we got to pray for Rebecca or whatever her name is. So they came over and everybody stands around and we've got to pray for Rebecca, she's pregnant. Even if that is true, does it need to be said there? A friend of mine gave me a little plaque one time and it said 3 questions to ask before you speak. Is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? I still have that plaque up to this day, and that was probably 30, 40 years ago. Is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? So even if it's true, is it kind? Is it kind to tell everybody that Rebecca is pregnant? Is it necessary to tell them? No, it's not. And so we need to ask ourselves those questions so often. And so it may be that someone's very hurt because death and life are in the power of the tongue. But speaking falsely is only part of the problem because we, even if we're not the one where the gossip is coming out of our mouth, we far too often listen to it. One of the times that I felt I did handle it well was I was having breakfast with these men from our church, and they started talking about another person from the church, and it was not what a wonderful man he is. It was quite negative. And they finally said to me, what do you think, Pastor Dan? And I said, can I ask you a question first? And they said, sure. If I was sitting here with him having breakfast, and he was talking about one of you like that, would you want me to take part? And of course, they all said no. And I said, well, then I'm not going to take part in talking about him. But far too often, we just take part because we don't know what else to do. But Proverbs 31:8 says, open your mouth for the mute and for the rights of all who are destitute. And I guess this is one part of my challenge to us this morning. Are we committed, or can we recommit ourselves to make Rosewood a safe place where it's a refuge that people can come into and not worry about the gossip of the world and the whispering in the world? That Rosewood is a place where people don't have to worry about, when I leave the church, are people criticizing me behind my back? Are they talking negatively about me? Because death and life are in the power of the tongue. And so we want to speak carefully. We want to speak truthfully. And then finally, when we learn to walk in wisdom, we learn to speak wisely. To speak wisely is to know what God would say, or what a good idea of what God would say in this situation. And when do we say it? And who do we say it to? And how do we say it? And even though it can be hard, God has not left us in the dark. He tells us how to deal with this stuff. If death and life are in the power of the tongue, then how do we speak words of life? Proverbs 25 says, like cold water to a thirsty soul, so was good news from a far country. This is how important and how valuable, how necessary words of encouragement and support are. Words that build up, they don't tear down. It's like giving cold water to someone who is thirsty. It's kind of like they're really dying of thirst almost, and you come and you just give them a cup of cold water. When a husband speaks encouraging words to his wife, that may make her day. That may just build her up. When parents speak encouraging words to their children, it can change how they see themselves. And I recognize now that one of the reasons that I struggled with insecurity was because of how I was spoken to by my parents. I was playing semi-pro soccer when I was 17 years old. And we made it to the provincial playdowns. And my dad, I lived in Calgary, he lived quite a bit north of Edmonton, and he came to watch me play. And for the one and only time in my entire soccer career, which went into my mid-20s, I got red carded, which means I got kicked out of the game. When I was in my 40s, I remember talking to my dad about how much I missed playing soccer and stuff. And he says, yeah, do you remember that time I drove all the way to Calgary to see you play soccer and you got kicked out of the game? Oh, thanks, Dad. I'm glad that's what you remember. And I admit, in hockey, I was a fighter. And in the old outdoor rinks, the snow used to get piled right up to the top of the boards. And my dad was standing here, and I got in a fight here, and I lost. Again, when I was in my 40s and even in my 50s, my dad would remind me of that fight that I lost. Probably the only one I lost. And so I would feel, even at 40 or 50, I would feel, bleh. Not because I lost a fight when I was 15, 16 years old, but because that's what my dad remembered. My dad remembered me bad things that had happened, or bad things in his mind. And so when we speak encouraging words to our children, it might change how they see themselves. When wives speak encouraging words to their husband, it might motivate them to grow in being a godly leader. Encouraging words bring us joy. Relationships can be deeply wounded by the words we speak, but they can also be helped by the way we speak. Proverbs 15:1, A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Do we realize how many arguments could be ended just by a gentle word? I had a couple I knew, whenever they would fight, they would sit across the kitchen table. When they started to fight, no matter what room, they'd go to the kitchen table, and they would hold hands across the table. And just that physical act, they said, just helped the fight so much, and how they dealt with it. There are times when we make excuses for how we talk to people, and this was me. Somebody would say, or Wendy would say on the way home, that was not a good way to handle that. And I would say, well, that's what I felt, and I had to get it out to feel better. The problem is I usually didn't feel better. I usually felt worse, that my wife had noticed it and even I hadn't. Or I would say, I spoke truth. If they can't handle it, that's their problem. I just spoke truth. Even that was debatable. But certainly even if it was truth, I did not speak it in a positive and a healthy way. Proverbs 15:23. To make an apt answer is a joy to a man, and a word in season, how good it is. So learn to speak aptly, beloved. We feel better when we choose to use the right word, and the most helpful and the loving word that we can even think of. Wise words have power. They have power to strengthen and to heal relationships. And sometimes the right words that we need to use with people is this: I am sorry. One final story. At a point in our life, we lost a child, and I had to suddenly take time off work, and I was working with the government at that time, and so I was leaving things undone, and so that was hassling me and driving me batty, and then having to get breakfast and lunch and supper for children. That's not really a strength of mine. And one morning, we were having breakfast, and my children were, horror of horrors, they were being children. And so they were kind of back and forth at each other. And please remember, this was many years ago, so you don't ask the elders to fire me. And I was so upset that I took a loaf of bread and I threw it against the wall. And I said, you guys settle down. Well, needless to say, I felt about this high. I'm their dad. And so that morning, as they went to school, I went and talked to somebody to deal with the grief I was feeling that I wasn't addressing. And when they came home, I sat them down. I had their lunch ready. I sat down and I said, guys, I have to ask you to forgive me. And they said, forgive you? You're our dad. And I said, well, dads can sin. And sometimes they sin big. And that's what I did to you this morning. So would you please forgive me? I'm sorry. And they forgave me. But you know that they're now in their 40s, and they will still bring that up sometimes. What that meant to them, that their dad just said, I'm sorry, and asked for forgiveness. So sometimes it's one of the most important things that we do, those 3 words, I am sorry. Father, thank you so much for your word, for how we use our words, Lord God. And I pray you enable us as a church and as individuals to continue to grow in this area. Father, I pray that Rosewood Park Alliance Church would be a church of people that speak words that uplift. That rather than speak words of death, we'll be people who speak words of life. Give us the strength, give us the power, give us the desire. We thank you and we praise you in Christ's name. Amen.